The rain had been falling for hours, hammering the moorland road into a river of black mud. Alawen Marden lay face down at the edge of the track, her lavender evening gown torn and soaked through, her body half submerged in a waterlogged rut that was filling fast. Her lips were blue. Her fingers had stopped responding 10 minutes ago. The laudanum was still thick in her blood, turning the world into a swimming, tilting nightmare she couldn't wake from. She remembered the taste of it. Bitter almonds beneath the sweetness of the wine Corvin had poured for her at dinner. "A toast," he'd said, lifting his glass with that beautiful, practiced smile. "To understanding. To forgetting what you think you saw." She hadn't drunk at first, but he'd watched her with those calm, patient eyes until she'd taken a sip just to end the silence. One sip was all it took. 3 days earlier, she'd found the maps, hidden behind a false panel in Lord Blackmere's private study while she was searching for stationery to write to her mother. Maps of every tenant farm across the Blackmere holdings, marked with dates and symbols she didn't understand until she found the letters beneath them. Correspondence with a chemist in Leeds, instructions for poisoning wells, formulas for salting earth so nothing would grow, dozens of families driven from their land by manufactured blight, forced to sell for pennies, never knowing the soil they abandoned sat above copper and tin deposits worth a fortune. The Blackmeres hadn't inherited their wealth, they'd stolen it from the ground beneath the feet of people they'd deliberately destroyed. When she'd confronted Corvin, his expression hadn't changed. Not guilt, not shame. Just a quiet, measured disappointment, like a tutor watching a promising student fail an examination. "You weren't supposed to find those," he'd said. "But since you did, you have a choice. Marry me as planned, say nothing, live comfortably, or become a problem." He'd paused. "My family doesn't tolerate problems, Elowen." She'd chosen conscience. He'd chosen the laudanum. She remembered being half carried to a carriage afterward, a coachman's voice asking no questions as the wheels turned toward the empty moor. Then cold. Then mud. Then nothing. Now she lay drugged and discarded, and the rain was filling her lungs one shallow breath at a time. Nobody traveled this road after dark. Corvin knew that. The sound of hooves reached her through the downpour. Distant at first, then closer, fast and urgent against the flooded stone. She tried to lift her head. Her neck wouldn't obey. She tried to scream. Only silence came out. The hooves were slowing. "Please," she thought, the word barely forming through the fog of poison. "Please don't ride past me, please." The horse stopped. Elowen heard boots hit the mud, then rapid footsteps, then a voice cutting through the rain like a blade. Good God. Strong hands turned her over. Rain struck her face, and she gasped, choking on water and air. A man knelt over her, blocking the worst of the storm. She couldn't see his features clearly, just dark hair plastered to his forehead, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to gather what little light the sky had left. "Can you hear me?" His voice was low, commanding, not panicked, but urgent. "Drugged," she managed. The word came out slurred, barely a whisper. His hands moved to her neck, checking her pulse, then her eyes, tilting her face toward the faint glow of his lantern. "Laudanum. How long ago?" "Hours. Don't know." "You're hypothermic and poisoned. Stay conscious. That's not a request." He lifted her from the mud and carried her to his horse, a massive black stallion that stood patient and still despite the storm. "My physician's lodge is 7 miles east," he said, mounting behind her and pulling her against his chest. "Can you hold on?" "I'll try." "Fight. Whatever put you on this road, you fight harder than that. Do you understand?" Something in his voice, not kindness exactly, but a fierce, stubborn refusal to accept her death, made her grip his coat with fingers that could barely close. The ride was agony and salvation woven together. His body shielded her from the worst of the wind. His arm held her upright when the laudanum tried to drag her under. Every few minutes, his voice pulled her back. "What's your name?" "Alawen. Alawen Marden." "Stay with me, Miss Marden. Stay with me." She lost consciousness between the second mile and the third. When she woke, she was in a small, warm room she didn't recognize, a fire crackling, the smell of dried lavender and beeswax. "The physician says you'll recover." The voice came from a chair near the window. The man from the moor sat there, watching her with eyes she could now see were the color of a winter lake, pale blue-gray, still and deep. His jaw was angular, his features severe, softened only by the exhaustion around his eyes. "Where am I?" "A lodge on the edge of my estate. I'm Severin Hale, Duke of Aldermere." The name struck her like a physical blow. Everyone in the northern counties knew it. The Duke of Aldermere, the most powerful landowner between York and the Scottish border. The man Lord Blackmere had called the greatest obstacle to the family's ambitions. "You're the Blackmere's enemy," she whispered, "among other things." He helped her drink, his hand steady behind her head. "Now tell me why I found you drugged and dying on a moor road 5 miles from Blackmere Hall." "Corvin Blackmere," she said quietly. "My betrothed. He poisoned me because I discovered his family has been systematically destroying tenant farms to steal the land beneath them. Poisoning wells, salting fields, driving families into ruin, then buying their property for nothing. The land sits on mineral deposits worth millions. They've displaced hundreds of families and built their fortune on manufactured suffering." Something shifted behind his eyes. A hardening. "You have proof?" "I saw the maps, the letters, and the correspondence with the chemist who supplied the compounds, but Corvin has all of it locked in his father's study. I have nothing but my memory." "Your memory may be enough." He walked to the window. "I've been trying to dismantle the Blackmeres for 6 years. They killed my brother, Callum. Made it look like a riding accident on a cliffside path, but the saddle had been cut. I found the groom who did it, but he disappeared before he could testify." His voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "There's something else," he said. 3 months ago, the Crown issued a decree. I'm to marry Lady Cordelia Blackmere, Corvin's sister, to unite our territories. If I refuse, my dukedom is forfeit. The lands, the title, everything reverts to the Crown. The Crown is forcing you to marry into the family that murdered your brother? The Crown sees political stability, not justice." His jaw tightened. "Which brings me to what I'm about to propose." He sat in the chair beside her bed. "Marry me instead." The room seemed to contract around those 3 words. "If you marry me, you become a duchess. Corvin can't touch you. You'll have my name, my protection, and every resource I possess to bring the Blackmeres to justice." "And you lose everything?" she said slowly. "The dukedom. Your title." "Yes." "Why would you do that?" "Because the alternative is marrying the sister of the man who killed my brother. Because someone needs to stop them." He held her gaze. "And because you chose truth over safety, and that choice nearly killed you. I won't let it be for nothing." "If I do this," she said, "I want your word on 3 things. First, we pursue justice for every family the Blackmeres destroyed, not just your brother." "Agreed." "Second, if this fails, you let me disappear. You don't use me as a bargaining chip." "Agreed." "Third, you tell me the truth. Always. Even when it's easier to lie. You're negotiating terms while still recovering from poison, with no leverage to speak of. I have exactly 1 piece of leverage. You need what I know, and I won't give it to a man who can't keep his word." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Small, brief, reluctant. "Agreed. All 3. He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal, Miss Marden?" She took it. "We have a deal." His grip was firm and warm, and it held hers a moment longer than necessary. "Then rest. When you're strong enough, I'll take you to Aldermere Hall. We have a war to plan. He moved to the door. She called after him. Your Grace, why were you on that road? In the middle of a storm? At night? Severin paused. For a moment, the careful control slipped, and she saw something raw beneath it. I ride that road when I can't sleep. It passes the cliff where my brother died. He opened the door. I don't believe in fate, Miss Martin, but I'm grateful the ghosts kept me restless tonight. Then he was gone. Elowyn lay in the silence, listening to the rain, and wondered if she'd just been saved or conscripted. One of them was honest about what he was. She hoped she'd chosen the right one. 5 days later, Elowyn sat in a carriage bearing the Aldermere crest, watching the Yorkshire moors roll past in shades of amber and grey. Her body still ached from the poison, but she was alive, and every mile between her and Blackmere Hall made breathing easier. As dusk approached, they crested a ridge, and Aldermere Hall revealed itself against a sky streaked with copper and violet. She'd expected a country house. What she saw was a fortress dressed as a manor. Dark stone walls climbed 3 stories, anchored by square towers at each corner. Ivy crawled across the eastern face like something trying to reclaim it for the moors. Behind it, the land dropped sharply into a wooded valley threaded with silver streams. It's extraordinary, she said when Severin appeared at the carriage window. It's old. My family built it when this part of England still settled disagreements with siege weapons. The walls are 4 feet thick. Nothing gets in that I don't allow. The message was clear. You're safe here. The household staff emerged in 2 precise lines. At least 40 people, from a white-haired steward to kitchen maids who looked barely old enough to be away from their mothers. I thought you said this would be quiet, Elowyn whispered. The wedding will be. But you're about to become the Duchess of Aldermere. These people need to see who they'll serve. He offered his arm. Stand tall, Miss Martin. Let them see that. At their head stood Mrs. Calloway, a woman with iron-gray hair and a posture so military her expression suggested she had never been impressed by anything in her life. Welcome to Aldermere, Miss Martin. We'll have you sorted. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. I appreciate your patience while I learn. The housekeeper's expression softened by exactly 1 degree. The title doesn't make you worthy. Your choices do. That's what I told the Duke when he was 19 and suddenly responsible for all of this. She paused. Dinner is sent up tonight. Tomorrow, you dine with His Grace at 7. Be punctual. He counts the minutes. The weeks that followed stripped Elowyn down to her bones and rebuilt her. Severin's tutors were brilliant and relentless. She learned which courtesies belonged to which rank, how to navigate a conversation without revealing anything useful, how to smile while saying nothing and say everything while appearing to discuss the weather. She learned that Aldermere had been in the Hale family for 300 years, that Severin's father had died of fever when Severin was 21, that his brother Callum had been the charismatic one, the heir everyone loved, while Severin had always been the strategist in the shadows. She learned that Severin slept no more than 4 hours a night, that he read legal documents the way other men read novels, and that beneath the controlled exterior lived a grief so deep it had calcified into purpose. Over evening dinners, they sat at opposite ends of a table built for 16, candlelight between them, and the distance both physical and deliberate. She recounted every detail from the Blackmere study. The maps with coded symbols, the chemist's letters, and the ledger entries showing land purchases at a fraction of market value. He cross-referenced against 6 years of his own research. The worst part, she said one evening, setting down her fork, wasn't the greed, it was the patience. They let families suffer for months, sometimes years before making their offers. They wanted the desperation to look natural. Severin's hand stilled on the table. Callum found fragments of this before he died. He told me the Blackmeres were hiding something in the land records, but he didn't have enough to act on. 2 weeks later, his horse went off a cliff. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be useful. He met her eyes. You have what my brother died trying to find. A complete picture. Names, dates, methods. Let me fight beside you, she said, not as testimony, as a partner. He studied her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand across the table, across the candlelight, across the distance he'd so carefully maintained. Welcome to the war, Duchess. She shook his hand and felt the calluses on his palm, the steadiness that never seemed to waver. Somewhere in that handshake, the deal they'd made in a sick room became something more. Not yet trust. Not yet anything she could name. But the beginning of it. That night, Elowen stood at the tower window watching the moon rise over Aldermere's valley. She touched the heavy gold band on her finger, the Hale family crest pressed into the metal. Somewhere to the south, Corvin Blackmere believed she was dead. A problem erased. He was wrong. She was coming for everything he'd built on other people's graves. 3 weeks into her training, a letter arrived. The Countess of Ashwick is hosting a midsummer gathering at Thornhaven Park, Severin said over dinner, holding the cream envelope between 2 fingers as though it might ignite. 30 guests, political allies, social arbiters, and the Blackmeres. How soon? 9 days. That's too soon. I'm not ready. You're readier than you think. But I agree we need a rehearsal. He set the letter down. I'll host a dinner here in 4 days. 8 guests, carefully chosen, people who matter. And if I fail, then we adjust, but you won't fail. The next 4 days blurred into a fever of preparation. Mrs. Calloway drilled her on protocol until Elowen could curtsy in her sleep. The seamstress delivered 2 gowns, midnight blue silk and deep garnet velvet, each designed to project authority she hadn't yet earned. The night of the dinner, Elowen stood before her mirror and barely recognized herself. The garnet velvet made her look older, sharper. Rubies that had belonged to Severin's mother burned at her throat like small fires. She looked like a duchess. She felt like an imposter. A knock. Severin entered in formal black, stopped when he saw her, and went very still. Will I do? She asked. You'll do more than that. His voice was quieter than usual. You look like you belong here. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. Are you ready? No, but I've learned that doesn't matter. Something almost warm crossed his face. That's exactly the right answer. The guests were carefully selected. Lord and Lady Pemberton, political allies. Sir Hadrian Cross, a barrister who dismantled corrupt estates. Lady Thorne, a widow whose sharp tongue could make or destroy a reputation in a single evening. And the Reverend Alistair Wynne, whose parish included 3 villages the Blackmeres had devastated. The dinner flowed like a choreographed dance. Elowen navigated every conversation, every probing question. She deflected inquiries about her background with grace, engaged Sir Hadrian in discussion about land reform, and when Lady Thorne mentioned tenant displacement across the northern counties, Elowen saw her opening. More than suspicious, she said carefully. It's systematic. I've seen evidence that suggests those failures aren't natural at all. The table went quiet. Every eye turned to her. After the guests departed, Severin found her in the library, her hands still trembling around a glass of water. You planted the first crack tonight, he said. I felt like I was walking on a blade. You were, and you didn't fall. He poured himself whiskey. Sir Hadrian will start asking questions. Lady Thorne will spread the whisper. The Reverend will talk to his displaced parishioners, 3 fronts opening at once. Elowen studied him. You chose those guests deliberately. Every one of them had a reason to distrust the Blackmeres. I choose everything deliberately. He met her gaze. Including you. The words landed with a weight that neither of them addressed. Severin lifted his glass toward the window, toward the distant moors, toward the darkness where the Blackmeres sat in their stolen empire, not yet knowing the ground beneath them had begun to shift. 9 days until Thornhaven, he said. When we walk through those doors, Corvin will see you alive, and everything changes. The glass caught the firelight. His reflection stared back, sharp and certain. Let him see what he failed to destroy. Thornhaven Park rose from its gardens like something carved from honey and light. Pale limestone walls, tall windows catching the afternoon sun, rose beds stretching in every direction. Where Aldermere said nothing gets in, Thornhaven said everyone is watching. Their carriage rolled up the gravel drive past a dozen other vehicles. 30 guests, Severin said, adjusting his cufflinks with surgical precision. The Countess curates her gatherings like exhibitions. Everyone present has been chosen for influence, information, or entertainment value. Which are we? All three now. He turned to face her. We arrive together. We observe. We don't engage the Blackmeres directly unless they approach first. When Corvin sees you, let him come to terms with it on his own. His reaction will tell us everything. What if he causes a scene? He won't. He's too controlled. But his mother isn't. Lady Blackmere is the real strategist. Watch for her. They stepped out into the sunlight and the stares of guests strolling the lawn. Whispers ignited immediately. Is that the new Duchess of Aldermere? I heard she was nobody. I heard he defied the crown for her. Alawen kept her spine straight, her hand steady on Severin's arm. She wore emerald silk that caught the light like water over stone, and a diamond choker that announced her rank beyond question. The Countess of Ashwick waited at the entrance, a formidable woman with shrewd eyes and a smile that calculated while it charmed. Your Grace, how bold of you to attend, and this must be the woman who cost you a dukedom. This is my wife Elowen, Duchess of Aldermere. Elowen curtsied. Thank you for your hospitality, Lady Ashwick. Hospitality implies I'm being generous. I'm being curious. The Countess studied her openly. Half of London thinks your husband has lost his mind. The other half thinks he's the bravest man in England. And which half are you? I reserve judgment until after dinner. Shall we? Alawen spent the remaining hours on the balcony overlooking the gardens. She saw Lady Thorne speaking with a cluster of older women. She saw Sir Hadrian arrive in a separate carriage, his expression serious. And then she saw Corvin. He stood near the fountain, golden-haired and golden-skinned, laughing at something his companion said. He wore confidence the way other men wore cologne, tailored, expensive, designed to charm. He looked exactly as she remembered, and the sight of him made her stomach fold in on itself. He thought she was dead. He had no idea she was standing 2 stories above him, wearing diamonds and a title, watching him with eyes that no longer held anything but purpose. Tonight, he would learn otherwise. That evening, 30 guests arranged themselves around the grand dining table under 3 crystal chandeliers. Elowen sat beside Severin. Across the table, the Blackmere contingent, Corvin. His mother, Lady Blackmere, whose beauty had aged into something blade-like. His father, Lord Blackmere, whose practiced warmth concealed a predator's patience. And Cordelia, the woman Severin was supposed to have married. Her expression was unreadable. Breathe, Severin murmured beside her. I am breathing. You stopped. I can tell. Then the Countess struck. Lord Blackmere, I don't believe you've met the new Duchess of Aldermere. Corvin looked up. His eyes found Elowen. The color drained from his face in a single visible wave. His hand jerked, knocking his wineglass. Red spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. Forgive me. Clumsy of me. Are you well, Lord Corvin? You've gone terribly pale. Perfectly well. The Duchess simply reminded me of someone. Someone? Severin's voice carried down the table, casual and lethal. Do you know my wife? The entire table stilled. 30 pairs of eyes moved between them like spectators at a duel. Lady Blackmere intervened smoothly. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Elowen met the older woman's gaze. Ice behind silk. Though I believe your son and I crossed paths briefly before my marriage, some encounters leave a lasting impression. Corvin had recovered enough to speak. I must have been mistaken. The Duchess is simply unexpected. I get that often, Elowen said. I tend to survive things people don't expect me to. Severin's hand found hers beneath the table, a single, firm squeeze. Well done. After dinner, Elowen stepped onto the terrace for air. The garden was silver under a half moon, roses releasing their perfume into the warm night. Footsteps behind her. She knew before turning who it would be. You should be dead. Elowen turned. Corvin stood in the doorway, his charm stripped away, replaced by something feral and frightened. But I'm not, she said. How? The dose was enough to kill you twice over. Someone found me first. Someone who actually cared whether I lived. He chose to stop. You chose to leave me there. That's the difference between you. Corvin moved closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. What did you tell him? Everything. You drugged me and left me on a moor in the rain, Corvin. Did you honestly believe there wouldn't be consequences? There shouldn't have been. His eyes were wild. I should have stayed to make certain. Yes, you should have. A third voice cut through the darkness, but you didn't. Severin stepped onto the terrace, his presence reshaping the space. And now, she's beyond anything you can touch. She's nobody. A farmer's daughter who stumbled into secrets she couldn't handle. She's the Duchess of Aldermere. She outranks you. She's under my protection. And she has a memory that will bury your entire family. Severin's voice was winter itself. If you come near her again, I won't wait for courts. I'll destroy you myself. Corvin's jaw worked. Then he saw whatever lived behind Severin's eyes and thought better of it. This isn't over, he muttered. No, Elowen said quietly. It's just beginning. Corvin disappeared inside. The moment he was gone, Elowen's hands began to shake. Severin's hands caught hers, steadying her. You held. You didn't flinch. I wanted to run. But you didn't. He's terrified. A terrified man makes mistakes. We just have to be ready when he does. He offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked back into the light together. Across the drawing room, Lady Blackmere watched with calculating eyes. And somewhere in the house, Corvin Blackmere was pouring himself a drink with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The first shot had been fired. The war had begun. The next morning brought golden sunlight and a garden breakfast arranged on the south lawn. Elowen wore pale ivory linen and a smile she'd rehearsed until it felt almost natural. She had barely filled her plate when Lady Blackmere materialized beside her like a silk-draped apparition. I must apologize for my son's behavior last evening. He's been under tremendous strain. Has he? Elowen kept her voice light. Business pressures. You understand. I understand business can be unpredictable, especially when the foundations aren't as solid as they appear. Lady Blackmere's smile thinned. Corvin was engaged recently, you know. A young woman from a modest family. She vanished before the wedding. Quite tragic. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Before Elowen could respond, Severin appeared. Lady Blackmere, I hope you're not interrogating my wife before she's finished her breakfast. Merely making conversation, Your Grace. How transparent of you. His hand settled at Elowen's back. If you'll excuse us. He guided her away. She's probing. Elowen whispered. Let her. Every question she asks reveals desperation. The morning unfolded in layers of careful conversation. Elowen discovered she had a talent for this particular form of warfare, the art of implying without stating, of planting doubt with a raised eyebrow and a carefully chosen word. By noon, whispers had taken root across the gathering. Investigation, poisoned wells, land theft. Each fragment was a small victory. That evening, music filled the drawing room, while the Countess's daughter played the harp with more enthusiasm than precision. Elowyn stood near the tall windows, watching the candlelight dance in the glass, when she noticed Corvin slip into the corridor alone. She shouldn't follow. Severin had made her promise, but something in Corvin's expression, barely concealed panic, pulled her forward. She waited 30 seconds, then moved into the corridor. Voices came from the study at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. "The audit will expose the Granby accounts." Lady Blackmere's voice. "We have weeks at most." "Then we destroy the records," Corvin said. "Blame the land agent." "And the Duchess?" "She's seen the maps." "She has no proof. It's her word against ours." Silence. Then Corvin's voice, thinner. "What about her family?" Elowyn's blood went cold. "She has a younger brother, 14, living with her parents outside Whitby. No protection. If the boy were to fall ill, or if an accident occurred, the Duchess might reconsider her testimony." Elowyn's nails drove into her palms. They were threatening her brother. Her 14-year-old brother who still collected birds' eggs and believed the world was fundamentally good. She turned to leave and walked directly into Cordelia Blackmere. For a terrible moment, neither spoke. Then Cordelia did something unexpected. She stepped aside and cleared the path. "The drawing room is that way, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I'd suggest you return to it." Elowyn searched her face for malice and found none. Only something careful and weary and old beyond its years. She found Severin in the library. "They're planning to destroy evidence, and they're threatening my family, my brother." Severin's entire body went still, not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of something dangerous gathering force. "I have men in York, former soldiers, discreet and loyal. They'll reach your family by morning and bring them to Aldermere under guard." "What if it's too late?" "It won't be." His eyes held hers. "I made you a promise, Elowyn. I keep my promises. Every person who's ever claimed to protect me has used me instead. My parents offered me to the Blackmeres to settle a debt. Corvin offered me love to keep me quiet. Even this started as a transaction." She looked away. "How do I know when protection isn't just another word for control?" Severin crossed the space between them and tilted her chin up with gentle fingers. "The difference is that I gave up everything I had to keep you safe. That's not control. That's the most reckless thing I've ever done. And I'd do it again tonight without hesitating." He kissed her. Not a strategic gesture for an audience. This was real. His hands cradling her face, her fingers gripping the lapels of his coat, the careful distance they'd both maintained collapsing into something neither had planned and both had needed. When they pulled apart, Elowyn was trembling. Not from fear, from the terrifying, exhilarating recognition of what was happening between them. "That was unplanned," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "Completely. And probably unwise. Almost certainly. Are you going to ask me to apologize? Are you going to?" "Not a chance." A voice from the doorway shattered the moment. The Countess stood there, one eyebrow elevated to a height suggesting decades of practice. How romantic. Though perhaps not against my first editions. Her expression sobered. "Lord Blackmere has requested a private audience with me. He's making formal accusations against the Duchess, claiming she's an impostor who stole confidential information and is using her marriage as a weapon of slander. He's demanding I withdraw your invitation." "What do you intend to do?" "I intend to hear both sides. Tomorrow afternoon, publicly, every guest in attendance." She paused. "I suggest you come prepared." After she left, Severin opened the door. "Come. We have work to do and one night to do it." They worked until the candles burned to stumps, reconstructing every detail Elowyn remembered and cross-referencing against Severin's 6 years of research. Maps, Names, dates, chemical compounds, land purchases. They built a timeline of destruction stretching across 3 counties and 2 decades. The strongest case: a contaminated well in Harrowden Village, where Severin had obtained the surveyor's report proving the Blackmeres knew about mineral deposits before the water was poisoned. The timing was damning. Not perfect, not airtight, but perhaps enough. What if it's not enough? Elowin asked. Then we lose this battle, but not the war. That night, Elowin dreamed of rain and darkness and bitter almonds. But this time, when she reached through the downpour, Severin's hand was there, and his grip didn't let go. The afternoon sky had turned the color of iron when the Countess assembled her guests on Thornhaven's south terrace. 30 people arranged in a wide semicircle. Elowin stood to the Countess's left, Severin beside her. Lord and Lady Blackmere stood to the right, Corvin behind them. Cordelia was absent. Lord Blackmere has raised serious allegations against the Duchess of Aldermere, the Countess announced. Rather than allow whispers to fester in my home, both sides will speak openly. Lord Blackmere stepped forward, every gesture calculated for sympathy. The woman you know as the Duchess was, until recently, engaged to my son. During that engagement, she stole confidential documents from my study and vanished. She then reappeared, married to a man who has openly opposed my family for years. This marriage is a calculated attack on my family's reputation. The Countess turned to Severin. Your Grace. Severin stepped forward with the unhurried calm of a man who had rehearsed nothing because he'd lived every word. Lord Blackmere tells a compelling story. A woman scorned. A rival duke? Very tidy. He paused. But tidy stories often omit the ugliest truths. He reached into his coat and produced a leather folio. For 6 years, I've investigated the Blackmere estates, not out of vendetta, but because families across 3 counties have been systematically destroyed, their land stolen through methods so calculated they can only be described as warfare against the defenseless. Slander, Lord Blackmere said, but his voice had thinned. Fact. In 1841, the wells in Harrowden Village were contaminated with industrial compounds. 14 families were displaced within 6 months. The Blackmeres purchased the land 8 months later for £12 an acre. The market value, based on mineral deposits beneath it, was closer to 900. He held up a document. I have the surveyor's report commissioned before the contamination, identifying copper deposits on that parcel. The Blackmeres knew what lay beneath that land before the wells failed. The timing is not coincidence, it's evidence. One irregularity proves nothing. One irregularity is an accident, 14 is a pattern. I have documentation of 14 separate incidents where water sources were contaminated and land was acquired at a fraction of its value within months. In every case, the land sat above mineral deposits the Blackmeres subsequently mined. Lady Blackmere stepped forward. This is manufactured evidence from a man consumed by grief. His brother died in a riding accident, and he's never accepted it. My brother's death was not an accident, Severin said quietly. His saddle was cut. He was investigating the very pattern I've just described when he died on a cliffside path he'd ridden safely 1,000 times. You can't prove that, Corvin said from behind his parents. Not yet. But I can prove the fraud. And I have testimony. From whom? Your wife? From the people you destroyed. He turned to the crowd. Reverend Wynne. The Reverend stepped forward. 3 villages in my parish were devastated. Families who'd worked the land for generations suddenly fell ill. Wells turned foul. Crops died. I watched 67 families lose everything. It wasn't blight. It was murder by inches. The word of a country vicar, Lady Blackmere scoffed. Oh, and mine. Lady Thorne stepped forward. I commissioned an independent soil analysis of the former Blackmere tenancies. The contamination wasn't natural. The compounds are industrial, manufactured, and identical across every site. The probability of that occurring naturally is essentially zero. Lord Blackmere's face had gone the color of old parchment. This is a conspiracy. By whom? Sir Hadrian Cross spoke now. By the Duchess? She has no resources. By the Duke? He sacrificed his title to marry her. What manipulation could a man who gave up everything be accused of? These are independent findings, Lord Blackmere. They demand formal investigation. There will be no investigation. Actually, a voice said from the back, there's more. Everyone turned. Cordelia Blackmere stood at the edge of the terrace, pale but composed, holding a leather satchel against her chest. Corvin's face went white. Cordelia, what are you doing? Something I should have done years ago. She walked forward and withdrew a thick sheaf of papers. These are the original maps and correspondence from my father's study. The ones the Duchess described seeing. I removed them 3 days ago. You treacherous! Lord Blackmere lunged forward, but the Countess's footman stepped between them. They document everything, Cordelia continued. Which wells were targeted, which compounds were used, which families were displaced, and the financial records showing what my family earned from the land they stole. She looked at Elowen. When Corvin told me what he'd done to you, when he bragged about it like disposing of you was clever, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. He bragged about it? The Countess's voice was ice. He said she was a loose end that had been tidied. Those were his exact words. The Countess straightened to her full height. I have heard testimony from a reverend, a lady of standing, a barrister, and your own daughter. I have seen evidence removed from your own study. I have heard your son described as bragging about attempted murder. Her voice carried the finality of a church bell. You will leave Thornhaven within the hour. I will be writing to the magistrate this evening. As the footman escorted the Blackmeres from the terrace, Corvin turned to Elowen. You should have stayed dead, he hissed. And you should have been a better man, she replied. Then he was gone, and the terrace erupted into a chaos of conversation, shock, and the particular electricity that follows the public destruction of powerful people. Elowen's knees buckled. Severin's arm was around her waist instantly, the only thing holding her upright. It's done, he murmured against her hair. We did it. No. He pulled back to look at her. You did. You survived. You remembered. You stood here and faced the man who tried to kill you and didn't break. Everything that happened today started with you choosing the truth over your own safety. Cordelia approached, still clutching the satchel. I should have acted sooner. I was afraid. But watching you refuse to be destroyed, I realized that staying silent made me as guilty as they were. Severin extended his hand. You'll need protection. I know. She took it. But I'd rather be forgiven by my conscience than by my family. That evening, alone in their rooms, Severin handed her a glass of wine. Your family is safe. My men reached them yesterday morning. Your parents and brother arrived at Aldermere this afternoon. She closed her eyes. You kept your promise. I always will. She kissed him then. Not the desperate, unplanned kiss from the library. This was deliberate. A choice, fully made, with everything understood and nothing held back. What happens now? Now the investigation begins. The magistrate will have the evidence by week's end, and the Blackmere Empire will collapse under the weight of its own crimes. And your title? When the Crown sees what the Blackmeres truly are, the decree will be quietly withdrawn. He paused. And if it isn't, I'll still have you, which is more than enough. 4 months later, Elowen stood on the steps of Aldermere Hall, watching autumn paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. Behind her, in the great hall, 14 women sat at long tables learning skills that would rebuild their lives. Reading, writing, accounting, land law. Women displaced by the Blackmere scheme. Ilawan called it the Aldermere Reclamation House. Severin called it her finest strategy. The trial had concluded 3 weeks prior. Lord and Lady Blackmere were sentenced to prison for fraud, land theft, and conspiracy. Corvin received an additional sentence for attempted murder after Cordelia, the coachman who'd driven Eloan to the moor that night, and a third witness testified against him. Cordelia herself, granted immunity, had taken a small cottage near Aldermere and was quietly rebuilding a life separate from the name that had defined her. The Crown's decree had been withdrawn, quietly, without ceremony. Severin had read the letter once, set it on his desk, and said, "The title stays. So do you. I believe that settles everything." Mrs. Calloway appeared at the doorway. "3 more applications this week, Your Grace. We'll make room. His Grace has already approved the renovations to the East Wing." Eloan smiled. Severin had resisted the reclamation house at first, concerned about security. He'd relented when she'd looked him in the eye and said, "You gave up your title so I could survive. Let me make sure that sacrifice was worth something beyond just us." That evening they hosted a small dinner. Nothing formal. Lord and Lady Pemberton, Sir Hadrian, Lady Thorne, Cordelia, and Eloan's brother, Thomas, 15 now and taller than she remembered, who had discovered Aldermere's library and showed no signs of ever leaving it. "To the Duchess," Sir Hadrian toasted, "who proved that one person's courage can bring down an empire." "To justice," Eloan corrected, lifting her glass, "and to the people brave enough to stand for it." After dinner, they walked through Aldermere's gardens. Rain was beginning to fall, soft and warm, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The moor." "Every day. I think about what would have happened if I'd taken the main road instead." "But you didn't." "I never assume the obvious path is the right one." The corner of his mouth lifted. "It's one of my better qualities." He pulled a small box from his coat. Inside lay a ring, a slender band of silver set with a single stone, the deep blue-green of a storm-tossed sea. "It was my mother's. She said it represented the distance she was willing to travel for the life she chose." He took the ring from the box. "Our wedding ring was a contract. This is something else." "What is it?" "A choice. My choice." He slid it onto her right hand. "I choose you, Eloan. Every day, in every storm, over every crown and advantage the world could offer." "You're supposed to be cold and strategic." "I am. Loving you is the most strategic decision I've ever made." He kissed her, softly, in the falling rain. "You make me brave enough to be human. How could I not choose that?" She pulled him closer, and they stood there as the rain gathered on their shoulders, 2 people who had found each other on the darkest possible road and built something luminous from the wreckage. And together, they'd proven that even the cruelest storms pass, that justice, however slow, arrives, that love, when it's real, doesn't ask you to be less than you are. It asks you to become everything you were meant to be. She'd been left in the rain to die, but he whispered, "Stay with me." And she did. And that changed everything. The end. Thank you for staying with us until the very last word. If this story stirred something in you, the courage to survive, the power of being chosen, the belief that even in the darkest rain, someone might stop for you, then I hope you'll carry it with you. Drop a comment and tell us your favorite moment and where you're listening from. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they deserve to be found, not forgotten. And if you're ready for another story where love refuses to surrender, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter. You are the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that even on the cruelest nights, love can find a way.